Hey, I want to tell you about the place that I grew up. Not in detail, but just one thing about it that's a whole lot different from Mena, Arkansas. Got pine trees just the same, but no mountains. I'm from a little town in South Alabama where it's basically flat, few little hollows here and there, but nothing significant that's going to block your view whatsoever. And so what that means is there are there are no big tall hills that you can go up on and see for miles and miles the way you can around here. There's spots like that all over the place in Mena. But when I was growing up, I still had this desire to get as high as I could. This idea that I wanted to get as high as I could and be closer to God. And since we didn't have any mountains, I started climbing old fire towers because we had some old fire towers that had been abandoned, and they were scattered all over the county. And there was one in particular where I'd go to every couple of weeks, and I'd get up to the very top, and I would pray. And I mean, it wasn't a view like from Rich Mountain or anything, but you could see about as far as B Mountain. I mean, because there's nothing to block the view, you could see a long way. You could see far enough that I could almost swear I could make out a little curve in the earth. And I got to thinking one day, sitting there in that fire tower, as I looked out and saw that curve, that faint little curve in the distance, I got to thinking, if I were to head out in that direction and stay right on course and keep going and going and going, I would slip up behind myself. And it was a neat feeling to realize how big the world is. But the main thing I liked about that spot is being able to see so far. Getting up high where you had a high perspective on things. Things look different from above than they do when you're down in the middle of it all. And I'll always remember that one day I took my dog with me to the fire tower. He stayed around on the ground playing, and I climbed all the way up to the top. And after I'd been there a while, I noticed my dog playing down below. He looked almost like a rat. He was so far away. But he was playing down below, and so I decided to call him. I called him. I whistled, and he heard his name. He knew that he was being called, and so he looked all around. And the more I'd call, it started driving him crazy because he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. He would look around, he would sniff, he'd go behind trees, but it never occurred to him to look up. And that got me to realizing how many people there are in our world who never spend much time looking up. Like that dog, they spend most of their time looking down and looking around. We are the only creatures God made who really look up. I know wolves howl at the moon, and a coon dog will look up a tree, but I'm talking about really looking up, wondering what's out there, wondering who's out there. We're the only ones who do that. We've got that capacity, but some of us don't really use it. Some of us just spend all our time like the dog, looking around, everyday life, eating, sleeping, waking, going to work, playing, spending, all that kind of everyday stuff, and that's fine. Sometimes, especially times like this, you got to look up and listen and realize there's more to the world than just your little world right around you. That there are powers and forces at work in this world much, much bigger and higher than any of us. And the writers of the Bible understood that, and it comes out most clearly in the scripture I want to start with. It's Psalm 121, verse 1 and 2. I'm going to read this one from the King James Version. Psalm 21, verse 1 and 2. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I will lift up mine eyes to the hills, to the maker of heaven and earth. Now, this passage is translated a lot of different ways in various versions of the Bible, and it's been interpreted and applied in a lot of different ways, and I've got no problem with that, with any of those. But when I read it, the thing that grabs me is that there is apparently some connection, some spiritual connection between mountains and God, between looking up and reaching up for God. Have you ever noticed how many things in the Bible happened on mountains? Israel was a hilly place, and so naturally a lot of stuff, important stuff, took place on hills and mountains. For example, Moses came to the burning bush at the Mount of God. 10 Commandments, Mount Sinai. When Moses got old, God let him go to the top of Mount Pisgah and look over into the promised land. And then he died there, and God buried him. Then think of Jesus. All the mountains you hear about in the ministry of Jesus. You got the Sermon on the Mount, the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus died on a hill outside Jerusalem. And after he was raised, the biggest appearance he made after the resurrection was to 500 people at one time. Where? On the side of a mountain in Galilee. I don't want to make more of that than is there. Just want to point it out. There's something about mountains that make us look up. And when we really start looking up and searching, we find God. What I'm saying is that there's more to reality than you'll ever experience as long as you spend your life just looking down and looking around. There's a whole lot of really good things that you are going to miss. And if you spend your whole life looking down, that in the sense of you're downcast and you're looking for the worst, or just looking around, focusing on problems and people and worries and fears and all that kind of stuff, you're going to see a lot of stuff that disturbs you when you look around. There's a lot of disturbing stuff going on in the world around us, isn't there? And that's why you got to spend some time looking up and realizing there's somebody bigger than all this. There's somebody that's in control even when I'm not in control. And when the circumstance can't be changed, God will change me. And then other times the circumstance will change and God changes it. But either way, I want you to think about this. Whether God changes the bad circumstance or he changes you for the better through the circumstance, it's a win either way. Either one is a victory. But people who spend all their time looking down, they won't get that. Only people who look up. You win either way as long as you keep looking up. That reminds me of a story I heard years ago about this king of India, ancient king of India. And this king had employed a prime minister to be his chief advisor. And this prime minister was well known for his great wisdom But he also had this habit that irritated the king. You know what his annoying habit was? No matter what happened, he would always say, "That is good. That is good." The king got aggravated at that. Finally, one day, the king and his prime minister were out on a hunting party. The king rode by a snake. The snake spooked his horse. He fell off, foot still in the stirrup, but it drug him. Somewhere or another, things got tangled up. His foot got cut. His toe, one of his toes was ripped off. Ripped off. It hurt. It hurt. And he was squirming in pain. And guess what the prime minister said? "This is good. This is good." The king got so mad. "That's it? You're fired." And he dismissed the prime minister. "Get your stuff and go." So the minister did. A while later, months later, after the king healed, he went out hunting again. And this time he got separated from the hunting party. And he wandered into some strange country that was inhabited by some wild tribal people. And they closed in on him, captured him, took him back to the village. And though he couldn't speak their language, he could tell what was going on. They were preparing to sacrifice him to their gods. They cleaned him up, they dressed him up, they decorated his body, and they led him toward the place of sacrifice like a goat going to the slaughter. And they got him up to the pole, tied him there, and then the witch doctor came, chanting, white, painted face, white, strange curls in his hair, looking all around him, moaning, groaning, jumping, inspecting the sacrifice. And all of a sudden, the witch doctor said, "Ho!" in that native language. He said, "Whoa!" He said, "This sacrifice is blemished. This man is missing a toe. We cannot sacrifice to our gods a sacrifice that's imperfect." So they cut him loose and let him go. He limped back to his castle, and the next time he saw that prime minister, he said, "Man, I got to tell you, you were right after all. You were right after all. It was good that I lost my toe. It was real good that I lost my toe." He said, "The thing I still don't understand is I fired you. And even when I fired you, you said, 'That is good. That is good.' How could that have been good?" He said, "Well, if you hadn't fired me, I'd have been with you. And I have all my toes." He hired him back. Prime Minister became his advisor for many more years, and it was good. And it takes a lot of spiritual maturity, and it takes a little higher perspective to see the good in things which are very painful at the time. But part of spiritual growth is learning to look up high enough to see some of that and to believe it even when you can't see it. You see, if you keep looking up, you're eventually going to see something good. Did you know there's a connection between what you believe and what you receive? There's a direct relation between what you believe and what you receive. I'm talking about what you expect to happen and what does happen. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to some football boys, and I said, there's an old saying, he who believes he can and he who believes he can't are usually both right. What you believe is going to have an influence on that. Now, once there was a Japanese general. This is a real true story. His name was Nobunaga. Lived 500 years ago. He was a samurai and a great warrior. Bold, daring. He would attack when others would have run. And once he found himself facing an enemy that outnumbered his soldiers 10-1. And so he stopped at a little temple, went inside to pray, and he came back out and stood before his men, and he said, destiny is about to speak. Your destiny is about to be revealed. And he took a coin. And he said, we're going to flip this coin and let destiny decide. If it's heads, we attack and we win. If it's tails, we escape, we run away while it's dark. Well, he threw the coin up in the air. Everybody heard it jingle as it hit the ground. They all gathered around, and it was heads. And the excitement shot through the camp, and the men began to shout, and they were so fired up. They charged and won this amazing victory. True story. And the next day, the king's servant said, boy, you were right about that destiny thing. The coin sure did show their destiny. I know it, said the king, and he pulled out a double coin, handing it to the man, a coin that was heads on both sides. Now, what was it that really brought about that victory? It wasn't destiny. It was believing that it was possible. It was believing that they could and would win. That brings me to what Jesus said in Mark 9:23. I'm going to read it first from the New Living Translation and then from the New American Standard. Jesus said, all things are possible to him who believes. And let's read it from the New American Standard. Anything is possible if a person believes. Now pay close attention to that. What it says and what it does not say. It did not say that anything is possible. It did not say that all things are guaranteed. It doesn't say that if you believe, it's guaranteed to happen. It says if you believe, it's possible. The idea is if you don't believe, it's sure not possible. And people who learn to look up and lift up their eyes to God learn to believe it's possible. No matter what I'm seeing down here on the ground level around me, I can look up and know all things are possible. I'm telling you again, what you expect, I won't go so far as to say it determines the outcome, but it sure affects it. It sure influences your outcome. And that's why what you believe is so important. And you got to be leery of really negative philosophies like this Murphy's Law thing. Have y'all heard of Murphy's Law? It's this old saying from a fellow named Murphy who's supposed to be a wise man, and it says anything bad that can happen will happen. Anything bad that can happen will happen. Well, is that true? It is true that bad things can happen. Bad things do happen. But that does not mean they always do happen. I can get in my car today, headed home, have a car wreck and die. That could happen. That's a bad thing that could happen. But I will bet you my life it's not going to happen. And every time you get in a car and travel, when you get in the car to go home today, you're betting your life it's not going to happen. It could. That doesn't mean it will. Be careful about expecting the worst. You know, some people also think they're very smart by saying, hey, I just don't get my hopes up, and that way I'm never disappointed. And they think they've hit on something wise. Never get my hopes up, and so I never get disappointed. Well, let's think about that for just a minute. It is true, I suppose. If you never get your hopes up, then sure enough, there's no way you're going to get disappointed. You'll spend your life just like that dog down on the ground, looking down, looking down. And I'll say this. There are some people who get their hopes up when they shouldn't. There are some people who have unrealistic expectations. And I want to give you an example from last week in the news. I cut this out of my favorite newspaper magazine. People who expect something that's just not realistic. Authorities in Auburn, California, removed 2 men from a city sewer where they'd allegedly spent 6 months digging for gold. Restaurant owner Ruben Ramirez discovered the mining operation after hearing pounding noises under his kitchen. Authorities went into the sewers and they pulled out these 2 men been prospecting for gold in the sewers underneath this town. And the city manager said, I'm here to tell you, there's no gold of any significance in our sewer. Some things really are unrealistic expectations. And I'm not trying to give you some kind of name it, claim it deal where you just you dream up some fantasy and think if only you believe hard enough it'll happen. That's not what we're doing. That's not what Jesus teaches. That's trying to manipulate the universe through magic, really. What I'm saying is that those who look up, those who keep looking up, are much more likely to have a good outcome than those who keep looking down. Those who say, I don't want to get my hopes up, I'll only get shot down. I want to tell you a sad, true story that's very close to me. Part of my family. I've mentioned to you before that my father is in the tire business in a little town called Monroeville, Alabama. He's been in that business since 1976. And that business did well. It provided well for our family all the way up through the 80s, 90s. But along about 2000, it started to slack off a little bit. The economy in that little town went down. And just several years ago, my brother and I finally talked with our daddy, and we said, hey, you're about 65. This would be an ideal time for you to sell this place and retire. Be free of it. But my daddy was in one of those places of life where he'd allowed life to get him down. And all he could do was look down and look around. You know what he told us? He said, no. I can't put it up for sale because if I did, nobody would want to buy it anyway. And we begged him, just put a for sale sign out there so people will know, I can't do that. Then people would think my business was in trouble. And my brother said, well, let me put it on the internet for sale. Somebody from far away may want to buy it. Nope. Nobody would want to buy this place. Nobody's going to buy a tire store in Monroeville, Alabama. Sure enough, nobody bought his tire store. But not long after that, a young man did buy another old tire store in Monroe, Alabama, that had actually closed because its business was so bad. He bought it, and he turned it into a thriving business. And it makes us all sick when we look back on that and realized he could have been buying Daddy's store, but Daddy didn't believe it was possible, so he wouldn't put it up for sale. Now things are much worse in the business, and my father will soon be 74, and he can't leave that business. He's stuck there, and now it really would be difficult to sell. And I want to tell you, you're afraid of getting your hopes up and getting disappointed. I want to tell you, there's one thing worse than getting your hopes up and getting disappointed, and that is never getting your hopes up and never getting disappointed. It's a whole lot better to expect the best and get disappointed every now and then than it is to always expect the worst and never get disappointed. What I'm saying is, don't let this sort of thing happen to you. Don't be the dog that just spends all your time looking down. Look up. Lift up your eyes to the hills from whence cometh your strength. Because your help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth.